there is an inherent absurdity in it. There's also kind of a belief in it. There's a trickery in it. There's something so malleable and satisfying about taking away the function of an object through manipulating it. It's a sort of functional vandalism. The end result, which I see as a sculpture, even in that case, are these very elegantly, elaborately manipulated bent forms, and they become something else. My name is Ricky Swallow. I'm a sculptor, and I'm here to do the Loti Smorgon Sculpture Terrace commission. So with anything like this, like building a scale model is like a major step for me, and it's sort of like what I would call like constructive procrastination. But because I don't live here anymore and I knew I wouldn't have access to this other than the one site visit, I wanted to have the space physically in front of me, like on a table. So I built quite an elaborate model. And I've built models before. This one might be, I think it's like one of the more finished models, but the scale allowed me to kind of move things in and out of there. And I built it in the studio and it was on wheels. The edge of the model then just fell off into the rest of my studio, right? So when I was adding things and moving things around in there, the model was this successful tool for me because it sort of allowed me to like think of things contained within a space with the distraction of like the outside space, which, the proxy of that was my studio. Anytime I've done a show just in a regular gallery, I always try to think of how is the space going to force a certain kind of work or dictate the scale of things. So the terrace is different in that, it's also open to the world and a very busy world and a lot of like architecture, obviously icons. Like I knew as soon as I saw the space, I couldn't just transplant some of the kind of things I'd been making in the studio and think about how they could live on the terrace. It's a kind of a call and response thing. So it's looking at the space and thinking about within my own language and expanding on my language or pushing my language, like what could I make that makes sense there for me as an artist, makes sense for maybe a generous view of like an audience when you think of public sculpture. How can these sculptures live on the space, sort of hold their own ground, but also not interfere with people's enjoyment of the terrace and the views and things like that? I always want to talk about process because it's important for me. It's hard to articulate like why making is so important to me in terms of like the outcome. I think there's something like there's almost there's something spiritual about like making things. There's something, so to me it still feels radical to go into a room and make things, especially right now when things move so quickly. But yeah, I don't know. I think it has something to do with like it's partly about like wanting to control every step, but if these things had been made by a fabrication company, I feel like they'd feel different. I feel like we stopped them at a point where they still have very subtle resonance of the labor that went into them. Like you might see a file mark, you might see like the drag of a piece of sandpaper or a radial sanding disc or something like that. I didn't want to eradicate the works of the life of them being made. Like that's important that that's there. When you see the forms, I hope they appear sort of like very much like concrete as is. Like that's what they are. You're not so conscious of what they look like before they were bent. Like you're seeing a fully formed thing, almost like I've referred to them as like the idea that they formed themselves or something like that. That resolve of sculpture or that kind of concrete resolution ending point and that belief in the thing that's in front of you is something that sort of underpins a lot of my work.